Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone
Yay.
watching. Today we are meeting with Ray, the creator of Tock The Gnome. How are you doing?
Great. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. Thanks for meeting with me today.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for having me.
So maybe we can just start off with you talking a little bit about yourself and your comic books.
Sure. Yep. So my name is Ray. Rachel Terwilliger is usually what's on my stuff. Um, I am a queer artist, writer, creating comics and also original illustrations, etc. But yeah, so my work, I've done that for gosh, forever, as long as I can remember, since I was really little. This has always been the dream. So I'm still figuring out how to make that work, really. But as far as the comic goes, I'm working on that since 2010. I am pretty slow in terms of my progress because I work kind of slowly. But got 147 pages so far, and I have it printed in like several, floppy issues as well. Hopefully, getting volume together soon too. And it's a story about interconnectedness and personal sovereignty and like the importance and balance of those things in the face of a fantasy fairy realm that is slowly losing its magic, and the reasons for that. And that's all wrapped in a sapphic, body positive romance, because that is what I do. So, yeah.
Awesome. And what inspired you to start writing?
Oh gosh. I just love story, like, as like, itself, but also as a tool for like how it moves people, and helps life be more tolerable a lot of the time. Growing up, like I very much grew up on like mainstream fairy tale stuff in addition to like other fantasy stuff as I got a little bit older and branched out. And that just like hits a part of me that like nothing else does, and I see that happen in others too, like how certain kinds of stories can and again, like make challenging things more survivable, and create a respite from the difficulties of the world that we face, whether that's like fantasy stuff like I'm into, or whether that's like true crime, or whether that's um, like political dramas, like whatever it is, like that always like creates a place where we can like both decompress and also like process like what happens to us in our lives in a certain way. And also having grown up in the 90s, like seeing the growth of like representation in stories, on like pretty much every level. Like there's so much work to still be done, but like it's gotten a lot different and a lot better in a lot of ways than it was when I was small. So like seeing that reflection too of how we like show up for each other in that, and how we can show up for each other in that if we choose to, is also really important to me. But yeah, just that inspiration and that safe space that we get to create and then grow through there.
I'm also a big fan of fairy tales. Has any inspired you to
Yay.
create?
Um, well, I would say like all of them in general, because like fairy tales tap back into like fairy tales are folklore, right? So like it taps back into like that primordial like human storytelling drive, and it gets into a lot of like archetype stuff and like just stuff that like anybody can really relate to if you like dig into it, but in a like more concise package in a way as well, because a lot of the times they're shorter stories, right, which is not what I'm writing, but I found that really accessible as I was like growing up and becoming a storyteller, in my own right and so on. So like like that in general, but then also my favorites are Rapunzel. I also have a fondness for like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, and I also really like this kind of obscure one called Felicia and the Pot of Pinks. That one always really strikes me for some reason, and of course, like Beauty and the Beast has a place in my heart too. As if you look at my work, kind of see that reflected. Like it's not a Beauty and the Beast story, but there are some common elements for sure.
That's awesome. That's one of my favorite things. I also enjoy Rapunzel.
Yeah.
So what does a day-to-day life look like for you when you are creating?
When I get to focus on just my creating, because like most creatives, I do also have a day job. So I get up and like deal with what life needs for the day, but then also hopefully get to then focus on like some time in my studio and like ideally, working on my comic, like the most recent page that's in production for a little while first thing in the morning, and then attending to other things, and then coming back and like refocusing on what is necessary for art stuff. So like every week I do world building post for the work of the comic because like I said I draw pretty slowly, but what I can do faster is like world building stuff, like making notes about like what exists in the world and doing research about like how that might look, etc. The world of the comic is high fantasy technically, but there are a lot of gaslamp fantasy elements and steampunk elements, or like borderline steampunk. Because the gnomes who are like the main people that I'm dealing with, and then they branch out. They've been a gas lamp society and have lost their magic for reasons I'm not going to go into because I hope you all read it. um, but so like there are technicalities and like real life stuff and like how things work that I may not know about. So like it might be a research day. It might be okay. I've done the research. Let me write out how this is going to look kind of day. Um, it might be a just like reaching for inspiration kind of day. I don't get to spend a lot of time outside, but I do get a lot of inspiration from nature. So sometimes that's just like going out into the woods behind my house and like connecting in that manner, and trying to find what the right vibe is for what I'm reaching for in that world building. Then I also do supplemental illustrations. There's a print club that I do that gets like an exclusive print every month that relates to the world of the comic. So doing work for that, and like I also do a weekly post that's just like a new gnome drawing every single week because that specifically is like what I like best about the fantasy stuff. Um, and I've butted up against like some other representations that I don't like in other media, So the answer to that is like, okay, well, if I don't like this, then what does vibe with me, right? So let's put more of that out there. So sometimes it's that kind of work. I do try to take commissions and stuff as well. Um, but my time is pretty limited, so like honoring those becomes kind of difficult for me. So like if I have that going on and there's a deadline, there would be work in that as well. And just finding that balance between like what I'm working on at the moment and what needs attention, and going from there for the day.
Awesome. Sounds very busy and fun though.
Yeah, it's
Um,
good though.
well, researching to me is actually a really fun thing. How much research do you do when you're creating?
Um, it depends on what the content is. Like for example, yesterday, the main cast of the comic, like the main set of characters, they are going to be on an airship, like going about the adventure of the story. And I don't know a lot about like like ship life, like I'm into a lot of pirate stuff as well, and a lot, but a good handful of pirate stuff. So like I get the vibe, but I do not know the details. So I spent a good chunk of time yesterday doing research on like what life was like on a ship. So like obviously that's a bit different because we're dealing with like an airship in a fairy world and not like a wooden ship on the ocean here on Earth. But I still needed to have those basics so I can look at that and see how that would be different then after and how that would be the same and then move forward. Um, so like for that work, I needed specifically to do that kind of research. Um, but then again, like the post I'm doing for world building this week, on Wednesday, because I posted on Wednesdays, um, is more of a like a vibe check for like some of the common sayings in gnome culture and like making sure that like it fits. So like that was more about like, okay, well, who are they to me as they are right now in where the story is, and what have I already set up, and does this all fit still? So it really depends, because like that was also research, but not the same kind, and it's really hard to like say, okay, I need exactly this amount of research and this kind of research per project, mini project within the big project. Yeah, so it depends, but it usually looks somewhere between two kind of like those two kind of styles of how I go about it.
Awesome. And how do you develop your characters and world in a way that you can show their growth?
Okay, so as far as character development goes, like first and foremost, back when I started the project, when I started the comic, like I needed to figure out what like where they're starting from. right? And then as things develop, like I get to see clearer where they're headed, and I've always had kind of like an end game in mind for what's going to happen with them and what's really going on with the world and how that's going to impact them in terms of butting up against it and hopefully fixing it because there is a big problem they're going to get involved with. Um, but first and foremost, that started with being all like, okay, well, where do I want the characters to start, right? And that was more of a conversation, actually, between me and my wife, who helps me with the story of the comic. You see us both listed if you look at the cover, because we work on like that basic stuff together, and they're really good at asking me questions about like uh like what I'm going for, and noticing details that I don't notice. So like very grateful for that. And that is how that like began in terms of, like why is it a gnome woman and why is there an orc involved? Because the main couple, since it's a romance, is a gnome and an orc. And like, okay, what do you want the like setting of this to be? And then at the time I had just gotten into steampunk. So like that's why that like solidified it right away. And like, all right, well, who else is going to be there, and like why are they going with them, and so on and so forth. And then in terms of like the development forward, that's kind of like a meeting of both like where it started and where I want it to end up. Right? It's like, okay, well, if they're going to end up here, sorry, you can see my hands. If they're going to end up here, then how can they get from here to there? Like, where would they need to be in order to get to that point emotionally and like physically in the world as well? So I've kind of like down like points, like plot points almost, that also involve like where the characters are around those plot points. And I tend to like I make notes like that, but a lot of it works itself out on the page as well. Um, I know a lot of other artists, or I have a couple other friends anyway, who like will plot out everything, like do thumbnails of the pages, like have the script like totally written before they even go into thumbnail page phase. And I haven't found that that suits me quite yet. Like, at least as I am now as a creator, what I do is like, I've got those like bullet points about like, okay, this is going to happen in this order, and that's going to impact the characters in this way and probably cause these changes. But then in terms of like the script, I usually only script out and thumbnail out like maybe 4 to 7 pages at once. And then I go and I make those pages, and then I do the next set, and let like the flow of that inform the storytelling as well. Because something might happen on the page in terms of how like the characters interact and like express themselves at each other, that might shift things a little bit, and I want to leave space for that like intuitive like magic almost, as well as like needing the structure of the plot. So, which is also a balance and also a journey.
It's great, thank you. Um, and what like software or tools do you use when you're creating, whether it's doing art or writing?
Oh, sure. So I actually like most of the writing and like the note taking and everything happens either like on my phone, in my basic like note making app, if it's something that comes up like in the moment, like if I'm at the grocery store and I realize something, but like there's that, but there's also I use Workflowy, which is an app and a website that's like a bullet point style organizational kind of tool thing. So I do a lot of just like the plotting out and the dialogue writing in there. Um, I also like write a lot of short stories, or not a lot, but a good amount of short stories to supplement the world, and those I write in WordPress, because that serves me right now. But basically, any like Word document editing app would do the same thing. So not to knock them, but like just basic. This is a space that you can write in, and it checks your grammar and helps you with that a little bit. Like that is helpful. And then as far as the pages themselves go, I just work out of a very large sketchbook, like a nine, well, not very large, 9 by 12 style sketchbook, and like map the pages out in there thumbnail wise, and then also like measure them out ruler wise, uh, like for the page proper once I've done the thumbnail stage. Um, for whatever reason, I did not ever end up being one of those people that graduates from sketchbook to like more proper unsketchbook bound paper. Having it in book format just feels better in my hands. And I've never like gone into digital work either. Like I've tried a few times, but it doesn't. feel as comfortable for me as like doing this traditionally with pencil and paper.
That makes sense. I've heard that from a lot of people. Personally, I prefer digital, but I've heard a lot of comic book writers note that they like hand drawing way better than digital. So what kind of
Yeah,
themes
same.
or huh?
Oh, I just said same. I agree.
What themes or messages do you hope to aim and convey through your work?
Well, so obviously, as I've mentioned, representation is really important to me. So like focusing on queer representation, like across as much of or under as much of the umbrella as I can. Um, and then also like showing body positivity. The way that I've built the world, like being a person of size is not really a big deal anywhere. Like if you look at, a lot of fantasy style peoples, like especially gnomes and also like with more like monster types like orcs and goblins, etc. Like they're often like broader in some sense. They're not like you see a lot of like willowy kind of like fairy characters and elves depending what you're looking at, but there is a lot more to that as well. So like I try to like put that on the page as much as I can, and leave space for like all sizes, while also building this place where it doesn't matter if you're a bigger person. Like that's really important to me too. Um, so those are like the first like surface things that pop up. But in terms of like the actual like underlying message of the work, like as I mentioned in the description of the story, like that balance between personal sovereignty and interconnectedness is really important in the world. Because magic in this fairy realm is broken, and that's partially because the peoples have gotten separated from each other out of varying fearful reasons, and also partially because like one person who had a lot of power did something really harmful that impacted her entire people. Um, and the characters who are in the story now, many of them don't know about any of that. They just think the world has been this way the whole time, and they're going to be like going out into the world to do what they believe is like a much simpler quest and see this problem and realize that like they are in a specific very unique space to be able to do something about it. Um, and that's partly because of like who they are and their willingness to be able to like talk to each other and change, but also from like some backstory stuff I can't mention with that spoilery. um but yeah, so starting from like that base of like looking at body positivity, looking at queer representation, and the like specific quest that Talk, who's the main character, believes that she's on, is that there's this legend about a princess who's trapped on a floating island. So it's kind of like a conglomeration of a bunch of different like fairy tale tropes. Um, and like she believes is true, even though at the time, like where the gnomes are in their life right now in the story, they don't believe any of this stuff anymore, and they haven't had their magic for a long time. So they think this is just a tale, right? But she's like, you know what? I bet this person actually exists, and I'm going to go rescue her. So in a way, she gets an inversion of the prince quest as well, or not like an inversion, but like a bending of it because she's kind of a bard, but also an engineer for her job, and she's just like a middle class, like working class person in this steampunk Victorian society. Um, and she's like, "Well, no, I'm gonna actually go do this. Thanks. I'll go rescue her, even though nobody else believes that she's out there. But nobody else believes in this, so she has to go and find help in the world, which is how she and this friend that she kind of half kidnaps get like involved with other people who will or will not be able to or willing to help them and like get drawn into this issue of like, oh, something's actually wrong on a grander scale. Maybe we can do something about that. And like, whether or not that's like a choice or a destiny thing is going to be addressed. Whether or not that matters is going to be addressed. So yeah, like there's a lot going on in there, and there's not too much I can say without spoilers, but like that's the base of what I'm going for, and that's where the story has been heading um, since I started it a while back.
I love that. Those are great messages and themes. Sounds very entertaining and fun to read.
Thank you.
Um, when you're creating, do you like have a plot outline, like, oh, this is what's gonna happen, then this, or do you just like let the story develop as you write?
Kind of both. Like I said before, like, so I've got, bullet points of like, okay, these things are going to happen. It looks like it's going to impact these characters in this way, but then like I only do like batches of pages in small form, like, 4 to 7 pages at once. And that includes the dialogue, and that includes the thumbnails with like, how the page will look. Um but I leave that space for things to like adjust a little bit. Um like, for example, I ended up like consolidating a bunch of the pages recently, like to create this montage. Like Talk and Ona, who's the orc character that she is gonna fall in love with. Hey, so spoilers, sorry. If you read romance, it's not a spoiler, but like I hope you all enjoy it anyway. Um, like they're going on this walk through the forest because like Talk and Bumble, who's the like tertiary main character. I'm really bad with those. I think that's the right word. Um, but like her best friend Bumble, who's the airship pilot that she kind of like half kidnaps to like get her out into the world to find help to find this princess. Like, they tried to find other gnomes to help them. That didn't work. They've gone into the lowlands, which is like the other area of the world that's like immediately near them. And the initial plan of like, okay, we found one group of people, let's ask them. Oops, they said no. Okay, what's next? Like, so Tak and Ona go through the forest to like find another group of people to ask for help. And there was going to be like a lot of stuff that happened on those pages. um and that would have been like probably a 20-page like stretch at least, filled with dialogue and filled with everything I wanted to throw in there. And like in the process of like editing and like looking at what I already had, like I realized that wasn't as necessary as I thought that it was. So two things happened. Like, so I smushed that down, but that like created space for like almost this like storytelling kind of vibe, like storybook kind of vibe, um, to happen instead. So like that changed kind of like a little bit of the direction of how things looked for a little while, and a little bit of the direction of like the tone of things. And then as I was doing that, there was still this one moment in there that was very, very vocal and like needed to have its own page, even though I was like within montage technically. So then I got to like make that adjustment as well. Okay, well, we still have these pages where like it's been a summary, but now we need to take one moment where like it's literally just 2 panels and you see this one thing happen. So like having that flexibility has been really important, and I do better with that flexibility if I'm working in small batches, while still having that like larger outline. And leaving space for that to change if it has to. Um, and on that note, there's also like another member of the crew who's going to show up a lot later than everybody else. And originally, they were supposed to just like be a side quest, and then they were going to leave them alone. But like the space for them to actually like be a greater part of the story came up. So maintaining that flexibility for that as well has been important. And I do that by like having these touch points that I'm allowed to change.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, when you were starting up to create, did you like do any courses or take any like classes to help you do better?
So I did technically go to art school. So when I was growing up, excuse me, like since like maybe like fifth grade in grade school, I had been doing private classes at this place called Art World in Clifton Park. I don't know if it's still there anymore, but hi, Rich, if you happen to watch this. So a lot of like what I do, I learned from him in terms of like the way that I actually build the artwork, like not the story aspect, but the visual aspect of it. And then from there, I went to college for art out at SUNY Fredonia, and like there were some classes there that talked about like storytelling. I took some creative writing classes and like obviously illustration stuff and so on, but there wasn't really like a comic class at that point. There might be now, I'm not sure. Um, but I did technically go to school for that. I wasn't really that well at the time in a lot of ways, so I absorbed what I could, but there's also been a lot of you know, like a relearning and redeveloping things. I take that more seriously, if that makes sense.
That's great. I would love to take some classes myself and get more into things too. Do you think those classes helped a little bit shape you to do this comic books, or do you think it was more just based on experience?
Um, I think both, like like having been part of like that level of like academia and learning for my learning, definitely shaped like my own attitude toward what's important to me in that area and like what doesn't work for me as well. So like I got to see more of like who I am as an artist by the example of like how that world is, if that makes sense. Um like plus the technical skills and everything. I did learn a lot. But again, like I'm at a point now where I'm having to like reevaluate some things and like refocus in a way that I wish I had been able to do back then, which was on me because I wasn't doing great for other reasons. Um so there's that, but then there's also like the drive to create this has come very much from like just the love of story itself. So like I definitely needed the tools of, of learning and developing my skills however that was going to shake out. But first and foremost, I needed the drive to create in the first place. And like I think that the inspiration of having grown up with stories like this was like the fundamental thing that like really set in motion like okay, like this is super important to me, this really hits my spirit in a way that nothing else does, this is what I want to do you know so as much as schooling is important for certain reasons, like what that looks like for everybody is totally valid however you learn. um and that in itself is just a tool and not a be all end all. Like the be all end all is like you have this drive, you have this like this passion to make this thing, to tell this story in the world, and if you don't have that you have nothing. So like that is the most important thing to me.
I agree. Definitely a big fan of passion myself.
Yeah.
What was I? Do you ever get a creator's block? And if you do, like, how do you get out of it?
um yeah, but usually I just kind of push myself through it. um like I've heard lots of other things mentioned that are probably like healthier coping mechanisms for when that happens. um but I tend to be like a push until it clicks back into place kind of person. What I will say is that like I will shift a little bit if I have to. So if I'm working on one thing and it's clearly like not working, I'll stop working on that, but I'll make sure that I do something else instead. So like even if that's just like picking up my sketchbook and drawing a quick pencil fan art of one of my favorite characters from something else, like keeping myself in the work is really important because I do tend to get like kind of defeatist and self-negative, we'll say, when things don't work out or when I'm having blockages like that. So reminding myself that like I can still move forward and it doesn't have to be perfect is really important for me in that part of the process too. Um, so again, like I want to advocate rest more. I want to advocate like going for walks in the woods and like re-inspiring yourself more. But I am a pusher, so
That makes sense. And yeah, burnout is a real thing that a lot of people struggle with, and it's definitely good to have balance, like you're saying, rest, go for a walk, because you don't want to just, just burn out and then you can't really do much with that. Um, what do you think makes a comic book visually engaging?
oh gosh. So obviously like art style springs to mind. Like the way that the characters are drawn, the way the world is drawn, like having something in that is like both cohesive and like beautiful, but I don't mean in the sense of like it having to be pretty. I mean like just the beauty of like that complete expression of the visuality of the world, if that makes sense. So like that aspect, but also and like it's hard to say because like different things appeal to different people. Like there may be one artist style who like I can't handle for whatever reason. Um, but that might be like extremely welcoming to somebody else, or there might be somebody who draws something like really ugly and gritty or like gory or something like that on purpose, like for the story and for the world itself, and that's important for the story. But I may not be able to like read that at the time if I'm dealing with my own stuff. So like that is hard to say, but I think that like having that strong voice in the like in that expression is really important, and that um I think that that is like one of the most important things. It's not the only thing because obviously like there are so many comics I've read where like the style looks a bit more mainstream or something, or it's a bit more simple, and like that's still okay and it serves the story itself, and the writing like still carries the story forward. um and like the art itself is not like a groundbreaking thing, like I don't necessarily mean it that way. But having that like cohesive vision of like, okay, this is what it looks um like that really stands out to me whenever I see that, you know yeah.
Did you have to make multiple prototypes of your drawings before you had like a final draft that you wanted to stick with, like with your characters mainly?
A little bit actually, yeah. So like I had a pretty solid vision of like some of the details, and again like the vibe of the world, because I was really into steampunk. I had just gotten really into steampunk when I started the comic. And I'd always been into fantasy like on some level, so like I knew what worked for me and what like I vibed with and resonated with, like as a fan. So like some of that kind of stuff like I had worked out, but I also had a lot of like inner roadblocks about what I was afraid people were not going to respond to. Like what I thought wasn't like mainstream enough when I was doing the original character designs. So I did one run of them, and I actually ended up starting to do this comic because I had been submitting to this like I don't know if they actually printed anything, but there was this like magazine that was online or also potentially also in print, also um, called Cross Genres, that would do like every month they would have like sci-fi and fantasy like smushed up with like I think it's one or two like other genres and other themes, and like all of their stuff for that month would be like in that wheelhouse. And they ran a contest where like you could submit comic pitches, and they would run it for like like one strip a week basically, and then at the end like it would all get collected and they were going to print that for sure. So I submitted what was going to be the first version of this to that, and got rejected. And I got rejected because I didn't push myself far enough. Like I held myself back with those original designs because I was afraid of what everybody else would think. um and then that didn't feel great, but it was still important to me to see where this was going to go, because like I had this seed of a story, and that was still there. So I went back and redid a bunch of the designs, um and then redid a little bit of like the basics of the story, and then just went for it on my own. And luckily we live in a time where you know like if you want to start a comic, you can start a comic. We just use what resources you have, and you can do it. Like there's tons and tons of platforms, and like things are really testy right now because like all of the stuff around AI art and the stuff therein is big right now. So protecting your work is kind of like this new fun area that we all get to figure out. But it still is true that like you can upload your stuff to Comic Fury, you can upload your stuff to like Facebook. I use DeviantArt as well. I do have the comic on Webtoon, even though that format is a little bit different than the way that I like do the pages. So like it's not really long scrollable unless I were to you know chop it up and like rearrange panels, which I do to put it on there, but it takes a while. Well, that to say, like there's a way to get your work out there, no matter where you're at. You know, um, so I'm very fortunate in the fact that like even though I got rejected from this thing I had originally drafted this seed of a story for, I still had a way to get it out there, and it's up to me to like sit down and do the work and believe in myself enough to actually do that. And I have forgotten where I was going with that. Can you remind me of the original question?
Um, it was okay. I'm not gonna lie. I don't remember the original question.
That's okay. It's all good. Um,
If we could just go on to the next one then.
sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a habit of erasing the questions when I'm done with them.
It's
Um,
all good.
out of like the characters you created, do you have one that you feel the most connected to?
I do. So okay. So Talk and Ona. So Talk Corrigan is Talk the Gnome herself, and Ona Kinbreaker, which is not her true last name, but like some stuff happened. Um, is like the main romantic lead, so secondary main character, whatever. Um, and like Talk very much is my enthusiasm, and also a lot of how my enthusiasm can cause damage. But I relate to Ona a lot more because of where I've placed her in the story and what has happened to her and like how she handles it. So like they both have some of my stuff. Um, but I feel like I'd probably have a lot better time sitting down to tea with Ona than I would with Talk. Which I feel silly about, but like, obviously Talk has her enthusiasm for a reason and she carries the story forward. She's literally an agent of like action that like is the catalyst for all of this stuff, and everybody else gets sucked into that, and there are reasons for that too, which I can't tell you. But yeah, and I also relate to I relate to her friend Bumble, who's the airship pilot, for various reasons. Like everybody else who shows up pretty much like has a seed of like something that's in me and my personality, but also like reflections of other people that I've seen and like other stuff that I've seen happen, in the world and like other storytelling tropes and things. Yeah, so I guess I would say Ona, but like there's definitely a reflection of um like myself in everybody to like at least some degree.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of how you create characters, is you just kind of pull from yourself a bit and work with that. Um, what do you think is the biggest challenge that you may face when you're creating?
Um, all right, so the biggest challenge that I have for myself is like literally the permission to show up and do this. Like I have a lot of stuff, just like every human has a lot of stuff, and I'm still working on like the space of self kindness where like I can, allow myself to be having that difficulty and then also move through it anyway and do the thing anyway, you know? Um, plus like, the fact that the capitalist nature of our society um makes it so it is challenging to find the financial support to take the time necessary to focus on projects full time 100%, so like that is also a bit of a challenge. But that starts with like how do I take a step back and show up for myself and like make sure that I'm prioritizing this, and like I'm lucky that like I tend to be very loyal and very determined and stubborn, which can be a problem with the stubbornness, but um like I started this 14 years ago now, and almost 14 years ago now. Um, and even though it's like moving very slowly and building very slowly because I draw slowly and have very limited time, I haven't given up on it. And that does mean a lot to me, even though like I still have trouble with that prioritization sometimes. Um, yeah, so I would say that's my biggest challenge, but also like I do wish our society was more supportive of artistic endeavors and so on.
That's true. The world would be a little bit better if we were. Um, what is your favorite thing about creating?
Oh gosh. So the power of imagination and the creative power of imagination that we all have within us, I think is really, really powerful. And that goes hand in hand with the power of story itself. Like I said earlier, like, how that like gives us a safe space and gives us a space to like, inspire ourselves and each other and like work through our stuff. Um, like having that creative spark in the first place, that imaginative spark, is a beautiful thing, right? So like, oh, I forgot the question again. I'm sorry. It's thundering here, and I keep getting distracted. Do you remember exactly how that was said again?
Yeah, I was asking what your favorite thing about writing was.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. So basically, like the honor of that, and like how the creative flow of that feels, like being in the inspiration and trusting in that connection with like that inner beauty and that inner magic that we all have, and the promise that like stories for me and imagination for me is like the promise that things can get better. Things may seem horrible on the outside. There are terrible things that are happening in the world right now, this second, right now. But like just the fact that we can imagine something better is humongous and a huge promise that like, okay, well, if we can imagine that, we can reach for it, right? So like just the act of creating itself, like drawing itself, like writing itself, like engaging with that is what I like best. And as far as like the actual physical process of it, I actually like inking the pages the most. Like I like the writing aspect very much because like I do want to see where the characters are going, and like I think Neil Gaiman said something about the fact that like your first draft is telling the story to yourself, right? Like that is immeasurably valuable and enjoyable too. But like there's something about like, I've already figured out what the page looks like. Like I've got the pencils down, I know where the characters are, I know what faces they're making, etc. Like all I got to do is put ink on that, because the way that I work is I draw the pencil first and then do ink on it and then erase the pencil afterwards and then do the color. Um, like the inking process, like I don't have to figure out anything new. Like I already know what it looks like. I just got to like make the lines that I want to keep stick. And there's far, far, far less pressure in that stage than anything else. Um, so that's the most enjoyable because for me, because it's the most chill. um, yeah.
I love imagination and seeing other people's creativity and imagination. It sucks that there is a good number of people who kind of lose that when they are getting older. And of course, like you mentioned earlier, with the use of AI, that's kind of lowering the imagination as well, because we can just type something in and it creates for us. Um, not always
hmm
the best. Um, what do you think makes your comic book unique?
Um, okay, well, I think what makes my comic book unique is like I'm obviously addressing some themes that have come up in other stuff before, you know, but I believe I'm tying them together in a way that I haven't really seen before. I'm not saying it's not out there. Like I don't get to read everything I want to read because again, limited time with life and stuff. Um, but like I think the way in which I'm like tying this together and making the point is is new, or at least new enough, or at least hits in a different way, you know. So there's that, and I also think that like there's not a lot of like gnome media. There's not like there's a handful of things, but like usually if you go into fantasy stuff, you're looking at like elves are usually the most popular. Like certain other things are becoming more popular now, but like focusing on gnome stuff, focusing on orc stuff, even as that's getting more popular too, which is great. Um, I think that helps me stand out a little bit as well. Which again, like I'm just totally serving what resonates for me with that. But part of why that resonates for me is that I don't. Well, I don't. That's not exactly true. Um, like part of why I believe it's going to stand out is that like they don't get a lot of attention. Otherwise, like if you go up to somebody on the street and you ask them what a gnome is, they might know probably because of like other popular media. I'm having trouble thinking of exact representations right now. But there's been more mainstream stuff that have shown up as kind of like a jokey kind of way almost. So they might know that, but like if you go to talk to somebody about orcs, like they might not have any idea what you're talking about unless they've watched Lord of the Rings, and then like just only that version as opposed to what everything else has grown into, like with other stories, that are happening now. So like looking at like lesser known things from a mainstream perspective, or less being lesser known from a mainstream perspective, not that they are lesser known in general. um like I think that that's also going to help, or at least I hope that helps.
I love that. And how do you see the comic book industry evolving in these next few years?
Um, so like I hope that the big ones stick around because I don't ever want to see any comic company go under ever. Um, but like like I do hear more and more stories about like it being difficult to publish from a traditional standpoint. Um, even the bigger comic companies are selective about what they choose to publish, etc. And like they've got their own agendas too and everything, you know. So like I think that there's going to be more growth in terms of like indie production. I hope, and maybe like more smaller publishing houses pop up. I hope that there are. Um, and what's been carrying things forward a lot of the time, and like I don't know the details about this, but I've heard a lot about like how web comics saved comics at one point because things were not going very well, and then just somehow comics like still survived anyway. And web comics were somehow a part of that. I'm not good at my history on that, but I've heard that a lot. So like no matter what happens, like the fact that we have other alternatives on how to get our artwork out there, our stories out there, as long as we like take the time to prioritize the fact that like we have these stories to tell, like we're going to be able to do that even if for some reason both Marvel and DC were to like tank tomorrow, which they're not going to. But like if they did, there would still be another way for comics to happen, right? Um, so I think that we're going to see a lot more like flexibility in terms of what people are willing to do in order to get their stories out there. And I hope that that's true as well, because like as much as I respect Marvel and DC for a lot of reasons, um, again, it's a very selective, competitive business, like everything is, right? So like having that space where like there are other options and there are other ways to get your work, your stories out there. I hope that that grows.
I agree. And like, how do you use your social media to help promote your own work?
Oh, so like again, I said I do two posts every single week. So I do one world building post. I have a Patreon, so like that's specifically on there for people who pledge and like want to learn more about like the world I'm building, not only the main story, So I do a post every week, like promoting that. And that goes everywhere. That goes on my Instagram. That goes on, like DeviantArt and Tumblr and everything. Like I put that out there so that it's there if people notice. And then I gotta trust the universe that the right people will see it. Algorithm fights notwithstanding. um, so I do that, and then like the world building posts and the weekly gnome posts that I do are in a way like almost self advertisement. Like the gnome posts are very much like me checking in with the vibe of like what I'm putting out there. Not always, because it's not always related to the comic. Like sometimes I do fan art, sometimes I do more traditional work, like more David the Gnome style stuff. Um, but like it is still mostly a vibe check and mostly like keeping in resonance with like what I see as what I want to push forward with how gnomes are represented, for example. But then on the other hand, that is also advertisement too, So like I get to advertise the comic by putting more of my work out there and more of like this is what I see, this is what I believe about them, this is what resonates, right? And then hopefully somebody who sees my work and like resonates that way too about what these fantasy creatures are, like will go and read the comic. um I do keep it up publicly, for free online, so anybody watching this, you can read it across several platforms at talkthegnome.com. The printed versions have like extra bonus story stuff in them, so like it's still really worth it to get those. But the core story is free to read because I want people to be able to experience it, and that is also part of like webcomic culture too. Um, but yeah, so most of the promotion that I do is like that kind of like look, here's a new thing for this week. Um, look, this is the way that my style is. This is the vibe of my work. If you like that, please come and look more. And just trusting that somehow the right people are going to find it.
Awesome. And it seems like you have an awesome schedule with that as well to make sure you keep on top of it. Um, how do you stay engaged with your readers and fans?
Oh, okay. That's mostly just in terms of staying on top of, comments on social media and stuff. I'm not good about that on every website because there's so many social media platforms now. And, I have a bunch of them to try to like hit as many people as possible, or be as available to as many people as possible. But like sometimes I don't catch all the notifications, but like making sure I keep up on that as best I can. And also like my most active fans, like those that are like actually engaged with the Patreon and stuff and like show up for that extra bit of like this is the world I'm building, this is the story, um like listening to their feedback too if they bring up something on the Patreon site and like ask questions and want to know more about this or like want to know why this happened a certain way. So as long as I can like answer that without spoiling the main story, like making sure that I like deliver that as well, and keep that engagement going and keep that like that communication going because like story is also communication. So like I read, let's say like I read Lord of the Rings, right? Like my experience of that is a communication between me and Tolkien, who is long dead now, but like we're still having that connection between like what he put out there and what I'm reading, right? So like I hope that like that my fans get that as well, and get their own experience of the story and like it hits something within their spirit the way that like my spirit's been hit by stuff and I'm trying to like reflect that back out with my own original work now, um and just like keeping that communication going.
I love that. And so true about the many social medias. I have like maybe 30 on my phone. There's just so many out
Oh my
there and
gosh,
they're
right,
just
yeah.
getting more creative every day. So we are down to the last three questions.
Okay.
So the next one is, what advice would you give to aspiring comic book writers or artists?
um all right, what advice I would give is like first and foremost like don't stop, like if you need to take a break, that's totally valid. But like the only way to be totally defeated is to stop altogether. So come back to it when you're ready, even if you've gotten like some harsh criticism, even if you've hit a snag where you don't know what happens next, etc. Like keep that space open to like continue after you've taken that pause. Um, and also like looking for external validation is not going to serve you or the story. Like obviously we need an audience, like that's part of storytelling is like you need your audience to have that conversation with. But like if you are relying on like that external approval and that external permission to like tell your story in the first place, like eventually like someone's going to say something that like makes it feel like that's being taken away. And then if there's nothing under there that's like literally just you and the passion, you and the drive, like keeping you going and keeping you telling that tale no matter what anybody else says, like you've got to have that too, so like try to keep your focus on that, on that drive and on that passion, and then let the external approval thing be secondary, if it has to be there at all, which like obviously like critique is important and obviously like that communication, like I said, is important with your fans and so on, but like remembering why you did this in the first place is what will carry you through in the worst moments.
That is awesome tips and advice. Um, do you have any upcoming projects that you are excited about?
Oh, well, I'm always excited about Talk. Talk is like the only one that I'm working on right now because I'm like very focused on that. Like my goal is to finish that and then see what happens. So please do read that. I highly recommend it. Um, and then like in terms of what else I'm doing, like part of the promotion also beyond social media is that like I am starting to branch out and like remember how to do festivals again. I started figuring that out like before COVID started. And now I'm starting to like get that going again. So I'm doing mostly local stuff. I live in New York State, and the biggest fairy festival in the state is about 2 hours away from me, and I'm bending there this year for the second time. So that is like not a project per se because it's not like another comic or another story. Um, but like that's really important for me to do in terms of getting stuff out there. So like that being a project in and of itself, like getting myself ready to go there and like put out my work in that space, is really important and really, really exciting. So I highly recommend that festival to anybody else who's in the area. It's just called New York Berry Festival. And I'll be there. It's the end of the month this month, so last weekend. And then in terms of like other little mini projects within Talk the Gnome, the larger project, I do have a bonus story that'll be going up next month. So another written bonus story, and there's a new issue, a new printed issue of the comic debuting at the festival I mentioned. So it's going to be a double issue too, which is my first time doing that. But there was a scene that would have gotten broken up if I had cut it into 2 issues, so it needed to be a larger issue to keep that all together. So that's really fun and exciting too. So I hope that people look forward to that.
That does all sound very exciting. I can't wait to see it happen. And our last question is, where can we find your comic books? Which you may
Oh,
have
sure.
stated it earlier, but
Yeah, okay, so I'll say it again though. So you can read the comic for free online at talkthegnome.com. That just goes to a page where you can click on like whatever format you like best for reading. So like, Comic Fury's on there, Facebook's on there, Webtoon's on there, my Patreon's on there, which obviously I want to plug most because that has the bonus material as well. So if you like, read it and you like the world, there's tons more about the world, um, like through my Patreon, which is just patreon.com/Rachel illustrates. But again, that's linked on talkthenome.com. And I do have physical copies available. So the issues I'm printing are on my Coffee. So that's ko-fi.com/Rachel illustrates/shop. Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
And now we are done. So, bye to everyone who's watching. And